I'm excited to be running the town hall section of today's summit, and I am super happy to welcome all of our legislative guests for today. It looks like Representative Corry is not here yet, so we will move on with the other two for now. Our first legislator is from the House side of our legislature, Representative Debra Entenman from the 47th District. Representative Entenman is serving her third term as state representative for the 47th District, which covers part of the southeast of Seattle. She earned an associate's degree of arts from Highline Community College in 2001 and a bachelor's degree in political science from Seattle University in 2003. As a non-traditional student, her passion for higher education stems from the help she received to make her own education happen. Debra and her husband Dave are currently living in Kenton. She is the vice chair of the Post-Secondary Education and Workforce Committee, as well as serving on the Civil Rights and Judiciary, Housing, and Transportation Committees. Thank you, Representative Entenman, for being here with us today.
Thank you for having me.
Our next legislator is from the Senate, Senator Claire Wilson from the 30th District. Senator Wilson has represented the people of the 30th District since 2018. She is in her second year as chair of the Human Services Committee and is proud to serve as vice chair of the Early Learning and K-12 Committee. She is also a member of the Transportation Committee Rules Committee and holds the role of Assistant Majority Whip. Before her time in the legislature, Claire wore several hats. She was an administrator in early education and family involvement at the Puget Sound Educational Services District. She taught pregnant and parenting teens at Mount Tahoma High School, was a program director for the Women, Infants, and Children Supplemental Food and Nutrition Education Program in a rural community in Montana, and served as an elected school board director for Federal Way Public Schools for 8 years. Thank you, Senator Wilson, for being here with us today.
Thanks for having me. Had to find my mute button.
All right. Representative Corry is still not here, so when he gets here, we'll move on to him. But for now, let's start with the questions. So the first question is directed to both of you. How did you get involved in your position? Why did you become a legislator? What inspired you to be involved?
Senator Wilson, would you like to go first?
No, go.
Okay.
I feel like we're on a road show, you and I. We've been together a lot the last couple of weeks. We've been hanging out a lot
together. So I decided to run for a very simple reason. The person who was elected to represent the 47th, I did not believe represented the values of the community that he was elected to serve. I was volunteering with the Children's Alliance at the time, and we were working on a program called Breakfast After the Bell. He testified on the House floor. He made 3 different statements that included children were obese, children waste food, and if they're really hungry, teachers could take food out of the trash to give to needy students. Now, when I was growing up, my mother went to work every day. She was an educator in Seattle Public Schools, but she had 5 mouths to feed, and we qualified for reduced price lunch. And I just did not think that anyone who was an elected representative should be able to be so heartless and say that they represented the community that I lived in. So I was approached to run, and I was helped by community members and speakers to raise enough money to run. And with the help of the House Democratic Caucus, I defeated an 4-term incumbent.
So I never planned to be here, nor did I ever plan to be a school board director. And I would say what I did was I said yes to anything that someone asked me. And I think I said it with a caveat, but I did say yes. And I'll say I started way ago. But it was around issues, not around politics, if you will. And it wasn't, I was really, and in college, I was engaged in with Ralph Nader and with the public interest research groups and issues around things like, and I'm going to age myself, but the lemon law and those kinds of things when people were being scammed. And it was really the first time that there had been any kind of action on a federal level to really kind of take care of that. And so it started with cars. But I didn't really care about the car. What I figured out is I cared about the people that were impacted by the cars. And so that's kind of where I figured out where my passion and my purpose kind of met. And so had a call on school board the night before filing deadline saying, oh, for God's sakes, we got somebody running that is going to just not be good. Would you consider it? And I'm very planful, but I said yes before I thought about no. And that's what really kind of got me on the pathway. But like Debra, I beat a 22-year incumbent, and I walk with privilege, and I know, and I use that privilege every day, but I also identify. And I can walk in a room and disclose who I am. And if I choose to do that, and so many folks in my community and across our state and country cannot do that. They walk in a room, and by the language they speak or the mere nature of the color of their skin are impacted, and disproportionately so. And our institutions have never been created to get people out of them. They've been created to keep people right where they were. So it was an opportunity for me. And I, for 30 years, had gone to Olympia and had never stepped foot in the Senate till the day I was sworn in, because it was really not a place that cared about social justice or social justice issues. So now my favorite thing is to say, you don't have to convince me. Just tell me what we need to do, because I've been trying to make the change forever. So it's kind of, I would say, go through every open door and don't think you can't. Don't think you can't. Anyway, that's where I would stop.
Thank you, both of you, for your insights. We'll move on to the next question now. This one is for Senator Wilson. This year, unless the legislature and the government act, it's possible that more than 8,000 students could lose up to 40% of their state student aid. We're worried about this and wanted to hear your thoughts.
Well, I think what's most important is your voice. And we know we're in a critical situation, but housing is one of our core issues, and you are one of our most vulnerable populations as we think about economic recovery and as we think about workforce and the crisis to the workforce solution. There's not one pathway, not one profession, not anything that hasn't been impacted and still is impacted. And so, housing and having a place to lay your head allows you to do all those other things. And so have worked on that. We'll continue to work on that. And in my sphere, what I would say is the most important thing that we need to continue to do is think about who we are now versus who you were, who I was then. And our scholars and our students in our 2- and 4-year colleges and our apprenticeship programs look very different. They're no longer 18-year-olds who are venturing off after high school. They are parents that have the need for stable housing, for clothing for themselves and their kids, for food, and for education. And we know the only thing that's going to get you out of having anything other than a thriving and a successful job is housing in order for you to get your education. So, we align some things so folks receiving public assistance have automatic eligibility and qualify for Washington College Grant. I did a bill making sure that individuals had access to Working Connections childcare while they were in our 2-year colleges. And we need to go beyond AA and AAS and BAs and say, what does that look like for MAs and PhDs? Because again, that's what brings you a thriving wage. And we need to be thinking about every profession and how it is we support those folks. So food, shelter, and clothing, that's Maslow. That doesn't take brains or rocket science. And what it'll take is your voices, because that's what really matters. And it isn't about the bill, it's about your story and the impacts it has. And again, I think about the committees I sit on and have to think about the intersectionality. And I don't sit on higher ed, I sit on K-12. So I also have to think about how we're getting young people ready. And then I pass those things on to Rep. Entenman so that we can think about what it means for our systems. I'm also just going to say I did a Pell Grant, did a grant for those that are coming out of our institutions, whether they are in our 18 to 25-year-old emerging adults or whether they are adults coming out of our corrections facilities. And that's the other one of my spheres, because again, education takes place everywhere people are. Yeah.
Great. Thank you, Senator Wilson. It looks like Representative Corry is here now, so I would like to introduce him as well. So Representative Corry is from the House and from the 14th Legislative District. He is serving his third term as state representative for the 14th District, which includes most of Yakima County and all of Klickitat County. Representative Corry earned a bachelor's degree in political science from the University of Washington, where he met his wife, Jenica. As a passionate supporter of our state and national constitutions, Chris was inspired to get into politics to serve the central Washington communities he loves. Chris and his wife, Jenica, live in Yakima and have 4 children. He serves on the Appropriations Committee as well as the Consumer Protection and Business Committee. Thank you, Representative Corry, for being here with us today.
Well, thank you for having me. Sorry I'm late. I thought it was 1:30. So I was just kind of sitting here on my laptop looking at emails and I saw an email come in that's like, did we send you the invite? And I was like, oh no. So I apologize for being late.
You're good, no worries. I will ask you the first question as well that the other 2 answered. So that is, how did you get involved in your position and why did you become a legislator? What inspired you to become involved?
So great question. I actually wasn't really looking to run for office. Had a pretty busy family life. We had 3 kids at the time, a nice hard job, and my wife and I were both working full-time, kids in school, and somebody approached me because we had a retirement in the district, and they were like, you'd be good at this. And I was like, no, I'm not going to do that. But they were like, no, you really should consider it. And so we looked at it, learned more about what the involvement would be like. And really one of the reasons why I ended up throwing my hat in the ring is I'm like a lot of people across Washington, trying to juggle it all, work, family, career, trying to make sure that I can afford a house, groceries, all those things. And so the legislative process doesn't necessarily lend itself to people in a lot of careers because it's just most people can't pick up and leave for 3 or 4 months every year. And so I happened to be in a place where I had a company that was like, well, we'll make it work. And so I dove in and it's been really good. And I've gotten to work in a lot of cool areas, some of which I kind of knew going in. My wife and I are foster and adoptive parents. So I'd always, cared about that system. But then there's other areas that you have no idea what's going on until constituents show up at your door, whether it's during session or even more importantly, out of session, and start sharing their stories and their struggles. And that's been probably the most rewarding part, is getting to engage with people I never probably would have met, and find out what is motivating them to make change in our community and helping them do that.
Thank you, Representative Corry. All right, we will move on to our next question now. This one is for Representative Entenman. We want to be sure that every Washington students of color, those who are the first in their families to go to college, those from Washington's rural areas, have equitable access to state student aid programs. From your perspective, where are we doing well and what needs to be improved?
I think to do if your job letting you know what financial resources are available to you. I just recently had the opportunity to sponsor which should have put a benefit navigator in every college, every one of our public colleges in our 34 community. If other colleges would like to expand that, that would be welcome. But that person is a three-quarter time person on campus to make sure students know about all the support services that are available to them. I think what you can do as students is to let us know. I think sometimes there are people in the legislature who may not be on a education committee who have an idea of what a college student is and what their struggles might be. But when college students come in and share their personal stories, or when they send us letters sharing their personal stories, it really helps to inform everyone, whether they are on an education committee or not, about the needs and the triumphs of what it takes to be successful in college. So you sharing your voice and your story with all of us, whether or not, again, we are on a higher ed committee, it's really important to making sure that we are expanding opportunities to everyone in the state.
Great. Thank you, Representative Entenman. The next question is for Representative Corry. What actions are being taken or considered to support students facing education barriers, especially in terms of work-school balance, childcare support, financial aid eligibility, housing and food insecurity, etc., so they can focus on their studies without basic needs, parental, or work demands barriers?
All right. Well, thank you for that question. I know we have done a lot in terms of lowering the costs and access to higher education, whether that's, your traditional four-year community, technical, vocational, that type of thing. And I think that's really important. From what I have heard talking to people, that's the initial barrier, right? That's the big barrier. My wife and I are both first-generation college students, and I remember the struggle of how are we going to pay for this? And that was 20 years ago. It's probably a little cheaper then. So some of the other things I think we're working on, I think Representative Entenman brought up a lot of those, right? In terms of making sure that the programs work together. There's probably more we can do. My alma mater is University of Washington. So they're always in my ear about ways to make the experience better. We talked about affordability. I'm trying to think here. Greater access to those. We've done a lot of good work for kids in foster care to make sure that if they've been in the child welfare system, that they have access to educational tools to hopefully break that cycle and put them on a track. But we can't underestimate the notion of making sure the right college or the right post-secondary is for the right student. I grew up, I'm 42, so I'm a millennial on the later side of millennial, early side. I like to consider myself Gen X, but I've been told that's not the case. But a lot of us were told the only path forward is a traditional four-year degree. And we know that's not always true. It's not for everyone. And so making sure that those opportunities mesh with what it is that you want to do, your interests, I think it's hugely important. So I think I answered some of the question. I may not have gotten it all, but that's kind of where we're going, and I'm sure we have a lot more to do.
Thank you, Representative Corry. The next question is for Representative Entenman. What steps can the state take to address the rising cost of textbooks and course materials while increasing student awareness of affordable options, such as open educational resources? How might legislative action encourage wider adoption and accessibility of these resources for students who are not aware of them?
Outreach. We need to spend more money on outreach. But what I was going to say is it's important for outreach. WA-SEN, we have the State Board of Community and Technical Colleges, and of course we have our four-year colleges and universities. We need to do a better job of letting the community know what are the options for students as far as open source, renting textbooks, and all the other resource we have available. It's just really about having resources and knowing that they're available. And to bridge that divide is outreach. We need to understand that investing in a good outreach strategy and then having it be a person's responsibility instead of people just thinking, oh, it will happen, but having an intentional person working on each of our cases and working with community groups to let folks know what is available on campus. We, in my community, talk about the mom mafia, where we have a group of moms who are not in politics and government, who we might meet at church or at the hair salon or at the laundromat in different kinds of places. And we drop off information about school funding. We drop off information about financial aid. We drop off information about what is available on our college campuses around food insecurity in non-traditional places. And that is what has helped to spread the word. When I was telling people about Washington College grants, I often ask people, do you know about the Washington College grant? And I said, a grant is money that you don't have to pay back. As we have seen the interest grow, it has been because of our non-traditional outreach strategies, as opposed to talking to a college student who may or may not be overwhelmed with starting school and getting acclimated to being in a different environment. So we need to go sometimes outside of the academic environment, into the community. Another great resource, of course, are libraries and our librarians. No matter what county you live in, our libraries and our librarians are awesome at helping to also share information and outreach about what's going on and what resources are available to everyone. What resources are available to everyone or to most everyone. So I think a real intentional outreach strategy is key.
Thank you, Representative Entenman. The next question is for Senator Wilson. How can the state better support higher education institutions to build or strengthen partnerships with businesses to ensure students, including those attending independent and private institutions, can gain relevant skills through internships and connections, as well as building experience to help with job placement post-graduation?
Just a simple answer, correct? You know, what I guess what I would say is, once again, who are our students? And that has changed. And I, will say education, regardless of whether it's K-12 or higher ed, everybody went to school. So everybody is an expert. But that's not the case, because who we are now and who you are now and your needs now are very different than the needs I think that we had. And even myself, I'm old, and people younger than me still had a very different need. Rep. Corry, I know you probably way younger than me. However, kids, I mean, there's just things that are not the same. And our institutions have been created just as if nothing has shifted and changed. And so when I say that, again, I'll vote for anything, okay, I'm just going to put it out there, and everything that is going to move education forward for pathways for young people and for anyone who wants to do that. But I also know my influences around things like DSHS, things like basic human needs, things like individuals who find themselves in the child welfare system, the juvenile justice system, who don't have family and don't have generational wealth, right? That many do, to have these experiences. And I myself will say I came out of vocational ed, which is now called CTE. And we used our professional folks, we used business, we used folks in the industry to really help us create not only the content, of course, but also what the needs were of individuals they were seeing coming into their industry. But we have to think about paid externships and internships. We have to think about things like covering the cost of childcare. One of the things with Fair Start for Kids, which is our landmark legislation, is that, again, childcare and early learning programs used to be for families who were furthest from opportunity, and people felt like they needed particular support and comprehensive support different than others. We now know that is just not the case, that there is not a family in this world that doesn't need support of some kind. So when I look at my sphere of influence, It's also, what are those things that are what I call whole kid, whole family systems issues that will support whatever the goal is of whether it's going to higher ed, whether it's going into the workforce. And I also think when we think about relevant skills and connections, again, we think about our scholars, and I live in South King County. We have the 5th most diverse school district in the nation, 120 dialects spoken by families in my district. And are we making those culturally relevant and responsive connections as we think about industry and business, and making sure individuals see themselves and meet people that look like them and are reflective of life experiences and culture and those kinds of things. So again, we just need to think about who scholars are, think about what their needs are, think about how those needs have changed over the years, and then how do we actually support making sure that we ensure, like you're saying, that students have access and that they also have a pathway. It isn't just about going to school. It's about what is it and how is it we get and allow you and help you launch and get solid in, what your profession may be. And that could change over the years, but I don't know if that answered it, but that's where I'm going to stop.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. Our next question is for Representative Corry. Washington is projected to have 740,000 job openings in the next 5 years. Those jobs will require a post-secondary degree or certificate. What initiatives are being explored to expand loan forgiveness, provide alternate funding options, or help employers contribute to college costs so students can pursue higher education without accumulating significant debt?
I'm not going to pretend I know the entire answer on this, but I'll tell you what I do know. We've expanded fully covered college for a lot of students. We've done a lot to get students credits before they get to college, whether it's through college in the high school, running start. Those things are hugely important because it is a much lower cost per credit than other ways. We've got a lot. So I live in the Yakima Valley. We've got CTE, we have college in the high school, we have IB, we have a variety of choices. As a matter of fact, I was talking to some students, and they tend to, depending on the program, tend to pick their high school locally. So we're fortunate enough to have that. That's one area. One of the things we do is listen to our businesses to find out what is coming down the pipe, so that way we can provide apprenticeships and provide other pathways to get them in there. There's more we can do, absolutely. One thing that I've talked about doing is helping provide B&O tax credits for businesses that are actually sending their employees back to work or back to school as part of their job training. We're seeing a huge shift, and I don't know if this is factored in that 700,000 plus jobs. Technology is rapidly changing agriculture. Obviously, that's predominant for us here. And our warehousing, our packing, shipping, storing, all of that stuff is getting modernized rapidly. And we need workers. We just need a different kind of worker. And so I've been a big proponent of upscaling our local schools to where employers can send kids back there, or kids can send employees back there to have them retrained so they know the industry already. But now that instead of moving into maybe a more traditional labor role, they're coming back as a tech specialist, and they're actually working on the machines that are now making automation easier, faster, safer. So those are some areas that I think the state should really incentivize, and then obviously just continue to listen to businesses and say, what are the in-demand fields?
Great, thank you, Representative Corry. The next question is for Representatives Entenman and Corry. And it looks like Representative Entenman is still having some troubles. So
You're just stuck with me again.
Yep, you get to talk again. What strategies are being discussed to address the shortage of mental health services and counseling resources on college campuses?
This is a great question. Oh, you got more. Sorry, man, I got excited.
Additionally, how are campuses ensuring mandatory training for staff and faculty, including referrals and appropriate resources?
I have no idea to that last part. I'm not on a college campus, so I don't know in terms of how they're educating. I will say Washington State is embarking on a very needed and long path overall when it comes to mental health and bringing out more services. Specifically for college, I don't really know on that level, but what I will tell you is as a whole system-wide in the medical field, we are rapidly trying to expand both careers in and places for people to practice once they graduate. We've got programs at the University of Washington. We're expanding mental health services at either hospitals, clinics, private organizations, nonprofits all over the state to make sure that when you need those services, they're available, because that's what we found is one of the choke points is we have people who need the services but can't get them. And so that's part of it's a workforce issue. And if we have people going into mental health services, that's one area where on the prior question, I think we're moving in the right direction. I know there's not much in this state where I'd say we're doing like A+, don't change anything. There's always room for improvement. But that's the area that I would say in general we're focusing on. If there is a specific need on college campuses, typically what we're doing is relying on our institutions to tell us what their priorities are, that's helping them get there financially.
I could maybe add just a couple of things as far as service more than, and that's around, there's a Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group, and there's also a joint legislative task force on the behavioral mental health system in our state. And the Children and Youth Behavioral Health Work Group is P through 25. So although it doesn't particularly look at campus, it does look at what our behavioral health and mental health needs are. And we also did some legislation, just I don't want to go without mentioning our SUD, MOUD issues related to drugs and alcohol. And so the bill around naloxone and having that available on all campuses, which is also inclusive of higher ed. But what you'll see come out of the Behavioral Health Work Group is a set of last session 10 recommendations, and this session I'm certain the same, that cover the gamut of buckets, if you will, from early learning to K-12 to higher ed to the court system. You know, what are those things that are the greatest levers, and what is going to help us leverage the expertise and the dollars across the state, and also being able to waive and leverage as much federal funding as we can, so we've got more flexible state dollars. So right now, that's those recommendations were just vetted, and you'll see that come up. And it does talk about workforce as well. So you'll see those coming forward to all of the legislature, and they may come forward in what's called a decision package that may come from the agency or the governor, or it may be a representative that will pick those up and start moving those forward. So just wanted to put that out there as well.
Thank you, Representative Corry and Senator Wilson. We'll move on to the next question now, which is for Senator Wilson. How is our state legislature working to improve the housing market for young adults in today's workforce economy?
That is like the number one, I mean, that is the number one issue. As I said, it's interesting. You'll have a conversation with some and they'll say the environment's the most important, because if we don't have an earth, you don't need a place to live. And I get that. And at the same time, we have unhomed and unhoused individuals and folks that are struggling, and we have got to come up with the solution. And part of this has to do, again, with generational wealth. It has to do with living wage jobs. It has to do with mixed housing. And it has to do a lot with just how much costs have increased. So things like first-time buyers, kinds of things, we have to figure that out. We've got housing trust funds. But again, I'm going to tell you about my work. And when I'm thinking about emerging adults, and that's what I think about in this space, when we think about 18 to 25-year-olds, if you will, and older, have been doing a lot of work in the extended foster care space, because what I know is a lot of our college students are unhomed and unhoused, and many of them have been state raised, if you will. And as a state, it is our responsibility, and it's unconscionable that we would allow young people to be unhoused when, as a family and as a parent, I would never do that to my own child. So extended foster care. And the other piece about this is the research around direct cash assistance. And there are folks that may disagree with me, But one of the things we also can do by improving things is allowing individuals to determine how best to use the money that they need. We need to increase the amount and the stipend for housing because we know that. We need to have some kind of control over the cost of housing while we're getting more housing developed. And I'm talking about, you know, for both the rentor and the landlord, we've got to figure some things out because people are losing their ability to stay housed. There's not one thing we don't need to work on. And I don't think there's one committee as we think about transit related development, as we think about, you know, where and how people get from one place to the other. So, and if I had a checkbook, I'd be writing checks because the other thing I think that is going to be influencing this is kind of what happens in November. And we have to have affordable housing, and we have to have it. If it's not on campus, it has to be near campus. And I'll just stop by saying pre-pandemic, I did a bill that was called House Within a Home. And we were trying to figure out how, when we realized the data around the number of unhomed college students, it was astonishing. And when I was working with Mockingbird, who works with many unhoused young people, we were trying to figure out what it might look like. And we started looking at senior housing around 2- and 4-year colleges. And what we knew is in our assisted living places and in our senior living places, they oftentimes have openings. And so trying to figure out how we could utilize those spaces. It's like an apartment. They've got food. There's multi-generational opportunities for just the community. And then we had something called the pandemic. And where did it hit? In our senior living facilities and congregate care kinds of spaces. So that kind of, we took a breath and took a step back. And again, trying to figure out what it might look like to utilize some of those co-located spaces as we're thinking about what other kinds of opportunities need to exist. And then the last thing I'll just say, I have a wonderful delegation chair. My teammate in the 30th did the covenant housing bill. And again, we need to get rid of systems and institutions that for years and for centuries have provided opportunities different for some than for others to, again, gain generational wealth and have places to pass on to their families. So I will stop there.
Thank you, Senator Wilson. We have 2 closing questions now, which are each directed to both of you. So we'll start with the first one. This question speaks to your particular passion and interest you'd like to share with students. Where are the current or future challenges and/or opportunities you foresee that students should be thinking about?
You want me to go first, Senator, or would you like to take that first? Okay. Well, there's a lot. And I like the phrase that excuse me, let me start over. I like how we're phrasing that as a challenge and an opportunity, right? Because with every challenge, there is equal, if not greater, opportunities and success financially and otherwise for solving those problems. No doubt you are all well aware of artificial intelligence and its role in our daily lives. I think that is the biggest opportunity. Yes, it's a challenge. I won't even get into the regulator side piece because as legislators, we've got to figure out what our role is. What's the state and government's role in having that, the right balance, right? Where we don't put our hand too heavy on it and ruin an industry, but we also don't let it run amok so that it ruins us. That's probably not the best way to put it, but it's not a campaign speech. One of the things that I would say around AI is what economic opportunity does that bring for Washington State, right? I've been listening to a pretty long form podcast about the history of Microsoft and how it came here and the amount of wealth and opportunities it created. And obviously it's true for the individuals, but it's also true for us as lawmakers. When we have strong, thriving businesses and people in our state, that gives us additional financial resources and otherwise to help invest in our communities. And so I think that's a big one. And where AI is going to transcend everybody, right now we're talking about it like it's a tech space, and that's true, but it's going to revolutionize everything. There's not an area where we're not going to be impacted by AI, whether it's climate, transportation, housing, all these things, public safety. There's going to be things that we're going to be able to use with all these. So I'm really excited about those opportunities. And I think if I'm Chris Corry 20-ish years ago, 22 years ago, and I'm looking to go to this, looking back, going to what am I going to study in school? This is where I would be going, because the future is there. The investments are there. So that's one area. And again, even if your passion isn't necessarily artificial intelligence or technology, if your passion is climate change, if your passion is, creating transportation systems, you can use these tools to impact the areas that you do care about. So that would be my answer.
I'm going to come at it from a totally different direction. And that is, for me, I would ask you, where are your current and future challenges? And where do you see opportunities that we haven't been thinking about or haven't even looked at? Because I'll tell you, the solutions don't come from inside. They come from folks like you. The bills I work on are bills that people bring to me. They don't bring the language, they bring the problem, they bring the challenge, they bring the suggested solution, they bring the wonder, and then together it's, for me, creating that group of having a like think and an unlike think coming together and saying, where do we agree? And then how do we come up with a solution? And what I always say is, you go big or go home, right? You always talk about what is that, what's utopia, or what's the go big or go home? But then you also have to have incremental steps in your back pocket, because institutions do not move as fast as you'd like them to, but you have got to be part of that solution. You have to be. And I go to bed at night right now. That's right. Don't let perfect get in the way of good. It's like, for God's sakes, do something. And you know what? The other thing is, you've got to be ready to mid-course correct. And we don't do that very well. We also have to think of things as systems, because people do not live in the silo of a piece of legislation. And the words on paper are only words on paper. So my passion and purpose is making sure that we don't just write it down, but that we're actually implementing, and it's actually making the changes that we thought and we think that it should be making. But the challenge is, how do you keep all those balls in the air, right? And how do we keep forward momentum when we have legislative changes every 2 years? And this year we're going to have a huge change with from the executive branch all the way down. And so part of that is a challenge, but it's an awesome opportunity at the same time, and trying to kind of find that balance. I go to bed at night worried about our juvenile justice system. I worry about young people who have never had an opportunity for activity, for leadership, for youth development. They've gone right from being a young kid into the child welfare system, to the juvenile justice system, and then to corrections. I worry about families with kids who are paying a college tuition to have their children be cared for, to know that their health, safety, and spirit are safe in someone's care. That should never be. I worry about our SUD and MOUD issues right now, and how it is we're going to support people, not put people in jail or in prison, but how we actually help people up and out and provide the resource. We're really good at putting people away and thinking that putting them away will make them better, without giving them what they need to actually think differently about how they move forward. And I think those are things I think about. And I would say to you, what life experience and what lived experience do you have that could help me or help us shape legislation that would change either your experience or would enhance someone else's experience based on your own? That's where I start. And when I met Myra, that's how conversations started. I just would say, you don't have to know anything. You just have to wonder, and you have to be interested, and you have to be willing to have conversations. And that's what it takes, I think, to really to start pondering how we actually make the differences that we're looking for.
Thank you, both of you. Our last question is, what words of advice, suggestions, or stories can you share to encourage community engagement from students and the ways they can participate in the legislative process?
You want to go first, Senator, or do you want me to go first?
I'll go for it. I'd say access, ownership, and voice are critical. Wear comfortable shoes. Like I was listening in, if you're in Olympia, you know, make sure you're wearing comfortable shoes because you're going to be walking a few steps on your Apple Watch or on your Fitbit. I would say interns, if you're in college right now, you may explore the internship program in the Senate. I know I have an intern that then turned into my session aide, which is now, and it was now my LA. I didn't know any of those opportunities existed. So if you want to know more, reach out. I would say figure out where your passion and your purpose meet. And Rep. Corry kind of talked about that because it's not like going to work. It's like doing what you love to do every single day. And the other thing I'm going to really say is you don't need to know a thing about the bill. And I'm just serious about that. What you need to know and what you need to share about the bill or about anything else you're advocating for is your story and the story about how it impacts you, because that's what people remember. And I will say, you know, I do scholar bills every session. My sex trafficking bill was a scholar bill. My posthumous graduation bill was a scholar brought bill. Comprehensive sex ed bill was a bill that was brought by scholars. So, and scholars, I would say from 12 all the way up. So again, the solutions and the ideas come from you. Do not be afraid to reach out. My door is always open. And I would say if you're in Olympia and you're kind of nervous, come to Ledge 407 first, and I'll make you feel comfortable. And then you can go on to your more difficult conversations.
Okay, I just say something. Actually, Senator, she actually makes time, even if she's busy. There's not a day that I haven't went there that she actually is the only person, and she'll like run to give us a hug. And you actually can sit in her room. So it's actually really, really helpful. No offense, Corey. I've never met you before, but yeah, she
Just
actually.
gonna cry now, but okay.
Well, you know what? You can cry when I show up at your door.
Yeah, a big hug cry.
But yeah, Claire actually, they were like, oh, she's busy. No, actually, she's not. She ran from the other side just to say hi to me and my daughter. And so I just thank you for the shout out. You're amazing.
So, well, I'm gonna have to meet you guys so that I can get that story next time. But I'm with the senator. Don't be intimidated by us. We're all citizens. None of us are special. Some people there like to think they're special, but I won't say who because they're in both parties. I jokingly tell people the story. I'm going to tell you guys the story real fast, even though it's a little gross, but there's a point. So freshman year, 2019, I'm a new legislator. I barely know where anything is, but you're wearing your suit. You've got your name badge on that they give you, which you quickly learn you don't want to wear your name badge because only the newbies wear their name badge everywhere. But you know, people, representative, people know who you are. You're starting to feel pretty good. You come home. I got this big, you're starting to get this little bit of an ego. And I mentioned I had kids. I had 3 at the time. I have 4 now. And I remember like I come home on the weekend. I'm Representative Chris Corry. I come home. I'm giving my 2-year-old a bath and he poops in the bathtub. And he looks up at me and goes, with his face, it was just like, I'm not cleaning it up. And then I was like, okay, Lord, I get it. I'm not that special. And so from here on out, I always try to remember I'm not that special. And so most of the people are like that. We're really easy to get along with. During session, it is crazy. So we may have 5 minutes. It's a sprint during a marathon, if that is an appropriate combination of a metaphor. But I will tell you, if you can build a relationship outside of session with your legislator, whether it's through coffee, email, chat, that can make a huge difference during session. That's where I've gotten some of my best bills were from people I did not know, who said, I've got a problem, I want to talk to you. And we met outside of session because I can sit down for an hour or two when I'm not in Olympia. And you can plan and prep and do all those things that will help you be successful during session. So sorry for the bath story.
No, I love it. Oh, that just made me crack up. Oh my God, I love that. Can I just add one other thing? And, you know, to be really honest too, there may be those of you that live in spaces and places where your representative or your senator may have a very different think than you do. I will say that politically. Or really oftentimes, and I'm just going to be very honest, especially with my brothers, sisters, and siblings in the LGBTQAI plus community, may often not even be afforded an opportunity to meet with their legislator. And that does happen, unfortunately. So I'm going to say to you, the other piece is we represent everyone. And so my office is always open because I will always have a space in place for anyone who sees themselves as part of the state, regardless of where they live is an address that fits within the 30th legislative district. I think it's so important, and it's unfortunate, but it's sometimes true. And so I just wanted to put that out there. And I know Rep. Corry is the same way. It's like, it matters to me not what your zip code is. What matters to me is what your situation is, what your wonder is, what you want to know, or oftentimes too, who you want to know, so that I can help make those doors open for you.
And I always tell people I don't ask your political party. I don't really care. We don't have to agree on everything. I tell people very seriously, I don't often agree with myself. There's times where I'm like, I don't know if you're right about that. So so never go into it expecting to find your like political like persona in Olympia, because they're gonna be different. But I can almost guarantee you can find something in common and figure out a way to work together on almost anything.
Great. Thank you to both of you. We've got about 6 or 7 minutes left. So if anyone watching has any questions that they want to stick in the chat, or if you want to use the raise your hand reaction, we can call on you and hopefully get your questions answered.
Can I just say, if Bo's on still, that Senator Benke's my ranking member, so I'm loving the fact that you mentioned him, and I thought of him immediately when you talked about your current role and what you were afforded and how he helped you do that. So I just wanted to do a shout out to Senator Benke on the east side.
He's a good guy. He's just down the road from me. He and I were actually roommates our first term. So
That's awesome.
So
That's awesome.
if you need materials to use against him, I actually have them, because we were really boring.
Rep. Corry, I don't know if you were on, but Bo has got had Rep. Benke and graduated, and now is doing this amazing profession and using this professional world. So we talked about Senator Benke, and I needed to make sure you knew that I heard that.
Thank you. Means a lot.
We have a question here from Michael B. from Gonzaga University. How do we invite you to student spaces and engage in a more meaningful space?
You would email claire.wilson@ledge.wa.gov, and it would go to my email box, and my LA would circle back and say, what are you thinking, and when might you want to do it, and what might you want to chat about? And then we would set that up. As Rep. Corry said, it's awesome, and I do it all the time during the interim. Session starts in January. It gets way more difficult, and everything is in 15-minute segments during sessions. So, but I'm available all the time, and would be happy to put my email in the chat.
Yeah, and somebody just linked to the member roster. So on ledge.wa.gov, which is same offer for me. I have lots of just random stories that I love sharing.
Great. We also have a question from Vincent, our own North coordinator.
Hi, first, thank you for coming and speaking with us. And this is a question coming from me, Vincent, not the position, not any of that. Like, this is 100% a personal issue that I've become aware of. And so, as I'm sure you're aware, there was the budget shortfall for community and technical colleges, and the what was it, OFM mistake. just what are your thoughts? Because I was sitting in on the board of trustees meeting at my school, and basically the conclusion that seemed to have been reached at this point was essentially that we're going to have to engage the legislature to solve this problem, because we aren't going to be able to handle it with the Office of Financial Management and come up with a real solution. So I just wanted to hear your thoughts, considering that's what seemed to be the conclusion, is that it was the legislature that would end up having to kind of come at bat for that issue.
Well, I want to thank OFM for dropping this on our laps. I say that as the guy that sits on appropriations. We planned for it. That's what we expected to do, and the fact that it wasn't done means that in my opinion, we need to make it right. So that's the simple fix. Our community colleges are working on shoestring budgets as is. I'm not gonna allow them to take another hit like that, especially given the amount of students they serve across a variety of areas in our state.
I can't speak for the Senate, but I would say ditto, especially if it's a mistake. And sometimes that happens and people freak, and we can't do anything actually though until we're in session, correct, Rep. Corry? So some of it is like, oh my God, will you do something? Like, we can't. So it's there, and it may be on the docket to early action or something, but you don't really know that until we actually get there. So, and Rep. Corry knows way more about that than I do. So
yeah, we won't be able to do anything in the short term, but we should be ready. And I've talked to my my chair about what we can do to get it done right away when we get there.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Caleb.
You're on mute.
You're muted.
Yeah, hi there. First of all, thank you both for coming and being here and speaking with us on this. Now I know that Senator Wilson had expanded a little bit and talked about student housing and whatnot and how we could do that. And Rep. Corry had added on to that just a little bit. But I would like to address the issue with what can the colleges do to allow or provide the information for students, being providing the information for how we can work together to work with the college and make this happen, but also how can we make it accessible to student campuses? I hope that wasn't too much.
No, well, here's what I'll tell you. There's one thing that, so like I know here in Yakima, my community college has some housing, not a lot, but they rely primarily on the community. And one of the things that I've seen is that not all of our rural communities have access to the same tax programs and exemptions that other counties do. I had a bill to expand multifamily tax exemptions to get builders to build more dense multifamily housing. It's a way to do it in a manner that allows for a tax credit to cover some of the costs over a period of time, as long as X percentage is affordable housing. And obviously, when you're talking about specifically community colleges, affordable housing is probably a huge priority, right? So that's one thing that I've been working on to address that. I'd have to think about other ways, but that's the biggest way you can get it quickly. I guess some permitting reform would be good, especially around some of the colleges and enabling them to use the land how they see fit. But that's just a guess on my part.
Thank you.
I have no guess. I'm going to stick with Corry on this one.
Thank you, both of you.
Thank you.
It looked like we had one more question from Richie, and that will be our last question for now.
Thank you, Senator Wilson and Representative Corry, for taking the time to meet with us today. This question is on behalf of me as a voter and resident of Washington State. First, I want to do a shout out to Professor Binky and Senator Nikki Torres, who I grew up with and went to school with. Some people you may have worked with and met. But my question, it's not really a question, but I'd like to plant a seed. You said you were Gen Zer, so here's a test. And I'm sure Senator will remember the forest fire campaign with Smokey the Bandit, where we brought awareness to forest fires, right? And so I'm a cybersecurity student, and my issue is that there is a lot of concerns around cybersecurity, and it's growing more and more every day. We had the cyber attack on our unemployment a few years back, which costed our state millions of dollars. So my seed that I'd like to plant is, what can we do to create some sort of information campaign for our retired residents, for our young residents, and everyone in the middle, to bring greater awareness to cybersecurity concerns and how we could protect ourselves as residents and sort of help stop the costs that we're incurring from these types of attacks.
So I just put in the chat, or I'm trying to, the cybersecurity bear that I asked ChatGPT to make while you were talking. It's actually kind of amazing, and I may steal that, but right now you're right. We do have a hodgepodge of things. I get notices from my bank, right? I'll see a post from our local sheriff's department saying these things are going on. But they're becoming more and more sophisticated and involved. And I kind of love that idea of like a Smokey the Bear for cybersecurity, because I get them too. And every once in a while I have to like stop and like I question my sanity. I'm like, okay, this kind of looks real. And you really have to dig in. And if you're somebody who's not 24/7 on a computer like I am, like I can't imagine, my mother-in-law will send me screenshots of stuff. Is this legitimate? And to this day, I've never said one is. So yeah, that's a great idea for something we can work on.
Thank you.
Senator Wilson, do you have anything to add for that question?
No, but it just brings up a wonder for me, and that's I sit in K-12. We're doing all these things on limiting phone usage in schools and such. And I worry, not because they're the cause of the cyber attacks. I worry because we got to figure out how we use things to move us forward, not be so afraid that we ask people to put them away, because young people are going to use those regardless, right? And so I worry sometimes in how reactive we are. I get it. I so get it. And Richie, I know nothing about cybersecurity other than, Highline was shut down, and that's my neighboring district, for 3 days at the beginning of school because of their concern about the loss of, they had no ability for their security systems because they had been attacked. And so, that part is so much above my pay grade. It's one of those things where I know so little about, but I'm willing to do whatever from those who know more than I do and how we have a solution. But I also worry about how are we creating the folks who are going to come up with those answers if we are limiting the brilliance they may have by allowing them to use this in a way that will move us forward, if that makes any sense at all.
It does. Thank you very much. I'm going to hear Professor Binky and see what I can do to, bring this forward in some way, shape, or form in the future. Thank you.
Okay, we've got the real last question from Bo.
Hello, thank you guys for coming today. It's been really inspirational and I appreciate it. I know everybody talks about housing in so many other areas, but one thing that I don't see a lot of questions on is, I know you guys promote to help our education and life goals, same as WA-SEN. But one of the things that I've experienced is that instructors tend to use outdated books and material and they don't want to move forward. So it's hard for somebody that has to spend money and doesn't have financial aid, or both, when their education costs so much, and then we actually have to go out in the real world and we're using books on an outdated education. Is there any thoughts that you have to make that more changing and using the right material?
I don't sit on higher ed, but I know it's been a conversation, and I know in my work in K-12, everything that I've done, we put on Open Ed Resource so that, there's that access and opportunity. And so I would wonder aloud and maybe shoot an email to Rep. Entenman and ask about that as someone who sits on that committee. If, Rep. Corry may have an answer. And I guess the other thing, it's so interesting because I sit in early learning K-12, and this conversation is about banning books and about getting rid of what's real in many ways. And so, in one place we're trying to get rid of things, in another place we're asking people to pay or to use things that are outdated, but both for different reasons, if that makes sense. We've got to figure out how we are making sure that all of our students have the most up-to-date information, and also how we help instructors, especially those that have been around for a while, maybe update and upgrade their own professional learning and professional development. And I know there are things already that happen on college campuses and ways that happens professionally with adults in that system, but it's always something to have a conversation about.
Yeah, I only would add, like, we've got the ability for buying power. We also have the ability with technology to make them easier. Man, I am really struggling today. Easily accessible and readily available for upgrade as things change, right? Because we talked earlier about AI. I would imagine that curriculum is going to change annually, just with the rapid pace of development.
Great. Thank you to both of you, as well as Representative Entenman, for being here today. We really appreciate you taking the time to answer these questions and share your thoughts with us. We are going to move on now, but I just want to let everyone know that if you do have any questions that you think of later, you can feel free to email any of the legislators here today. Or if you don't feel comfortable doing that, you can also shoot me an email, or Kayla or Becca, and we can help you with that and try to get your question asked.